Eric Ramsey, let's kick things off here and talk about hold.
Yeah, let's talk about hold. I think this comes from a story I have on LSR this week. Just starting to, we're almost 5 years into this thing now, and we're starting to see some actual trends in the data that we've sort of suspected or been looking for or didn't realize were happening. And one of them I just happened to be noticing as I was looking at charts is that hold has been ticking up pretty steadily since, for about the past 4 years. What caught my eye was a string of 10+% months for some of the states and some of the operators that kind of got me looking at it in a little more depth. And yeah, the short story is, we started from about 5.5% hold in Nevada prior to the repeal of PASPA, and new markets that have launched are holding significantly more than that, upwards of 10% in most cases. And, not picking on anyone here, but if we're going to look at the operators individually, it's really FanDuel that is driving the majority of this increase. They have held double-digit percent of bets nationwide for the last 8 months and 9 of the last 10. Very few other operators are doing that. And obviously, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but we have some sense of why this is happening. We're seeing an increase in same-game parlays and an influx of newer bettors. And all of this really just speaks to something we've been talking about now for a long time, operators trying to find a way to turn this lucrative business into actual profit for their shareholders, investors. So seeing some of the maturation of the market in that regard, with operators sort of reapproaching things and reimagining the way they're conducting business to try to make their shareholders some money, essentially.
So, Dustin, one of the things that we hear, all the time about, we have some sports books that are certainly not afraid to kind of take some shots here and there at some of the other sports books that are out there. One of the things that they do talk about is the hold. Some of these sports books do brag about that they have lower hold, that their theoretical hold is much lower, and that's just why that they are the better sports book to bet at and different things like that. And so I'm wondering, as we do get to more, again, we're still in the infancy. I know that we've been living and breathing this for several years, and so it just seems like everyone should know this, and but I do wonder, as education and maturation of the industry does come along, that the hold, because we saw this in DFS, remember, Dustin, as you and I were covering this very, very, very intently, where it was like everyone just played it first and no one cared, and then it started to be like, wait, man, the rake's pretty high in DFS, and then that became like an actual thing. And so I do wonder, as we progress here in sports betting, if some of the people start going, wait a minute, well, how come I'm going to carry the one and add this up and then hold this up? Wait, that doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, really good story by Eric, kind of breaking this trend down across the United States market right now. There's a lot that goes into this. We could spend a lot more time talking about this, I'm sure, but it's where I come at it from is more hold is not necessarily bad. This is just reflecting customer choice right now. Customers want, we say this a lot, customers want parlays and same-game parlays. They want to bet a small amount of money to win a lot of money. They do not want to grind 110 sides to like less than double your money. They have sought this out. Now, in the long term, is this good for the ecosystem? I think is what we're gonna find out. Are we churning players at a rate that is not sustainable? That remains to be seen, because if people are losing more money faster, are they then quitting, or not being regular customers, or their lifetime value is lower? We don't know the answer to any of that right now. But I can tell you right now, consumer choice is for the higher hold products, that people are betting in game. Again, higher VIG, -115, sometimes higher depending on what the sport is and where it's being placed, and then parlays, same game parlays, regular parlays. We can rail against the hold and that these are bad bets all we want, and we can educate people of that. But that is what the customer has said they wanted. It is quite clear at this point that that's what they want, and they want to they want to bet this way. The outstanding question is whether this is good for the long-term health of the industry, and I don't think we have that answer.
It's not a case yet of operators taking advantage of customers. I don't think we may get to that point, and there are isolated cases of that, but for the most part, like Dustin said, this is what customers want, and this is what shareholders have come to expect.
It's a product of the market, right? I mean, it's just the product of the market. I think the one thing that we can look at where their operators can be a little less greedy is in these futures pools and in the futures markets. Like, that is where some of the hold gets a little egregious, right? Like, you start looking in, and I don't want to scare people off, but you start kind of looking in at at what the hold percentages are in like a golf tournament or something like that, and you bet into this, and then you realize like, oh wow, that is an incredible amount of built-in hold there. And so it's one of those deals where I think they can be a little less greedy in these futures pools for sure. But like the whole, like as Dustin mentioned, like hold overall isn't necessarily a bad thing because it's just a product of people making bets that they find fun, but they're, not necessarily as EV as maybe a sophisticated bettor would make when it comes down to it, Eric. But that this has always been the deal, right? I mean, I know we mentioned DFS a little bit earlier, but the reason the Millionaire Maker tournament was the most popular tournament, still is the most popular tournament on the various DFS sites, where people want to bet a little to win a lot, and it's always been that way. It's the reason the lottery still exists. It's the reason all of this. So I mean, we can pound our fists on like, shouldn't be making these bets, and these are bad bets. We can do that all day long, but it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change the actions of the general public, who really and truly isn't taking this all that seriously. They just want a little bit of sweat when it comes down to the game that they're going to watch later that night.
It's amusing it's the parallels between DFS I think are really valid. Obviously, we're talking about DraftKings and FanDuel here, which is amusing by itself, but also, I think one of the qualms with DFS rake was the lack of transparency. It was hidden in the contest buy-ins, and I think we're seeing something similar with sports betting. You're talking about the over-round on golf markets that is kind of hidden and not really transparent to bettors. We may see more of a push for the transparency along the same lines we saw with DFS. And last point I'll make about this, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of this increase in hold is coming from the operator's own money. It's promotional money in a lot of cases for these new markets that is being given back to the operators essentially. So some of this on paper hold is a little more inflated than it looks like too, just as a counterpoint to myself there.
And one last point on all of this is, I think the one thing you can question the books on is how much they push this stuff, right? Like again, I think the worst part of this is social media, like 15 leg parlay, $5 to win 800,000, whatever. I mean, I think that I made that one up. Maybe somebody did that, but like that, those are the ones you see. But for every one of those, there are thousands, tens of thousands of single game parlays and parlays that lose. And it would be nice to see a little bit more transparency on that. There's been much to do about FanDuel and DraftKings and others putting these same game parlays right in your face. And I'll say, as a relatively lazy sports bettor who just wants, what's action, right, I see those little boxes on DraftKings that say, here's this little pre-made same game parlay. I'm like, I don't want to spend 5 minutes doing a same game parlay that probably has zero chance of hitting anyway. Like, I'll click that button and bet $5 on it. Like, that's you can say that's bad and you're pushing people to it, but it's again, even though I'm in the industry, I'm a casual bettor. I don't spend a lot of time researching. I just want to put a little bit of money down. I'm probably I'm a net loser, I think, over the 3 years I've had it here in Oregon. But that is what people want. People don't want to spend. I don't want to spend 10 minutes putting together a same game parlay of, hey, this looks interesting. I'm going to watch this game. Here, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson to make a bunch of threes. Sure. And I don't know, these people who are saying they're betting the same game parlays and losing, man, I'm picking the right ones because I'm like 50% on hitting these little parlays they put up. Maybe you're just not picking the right ones because I have a pretty good record in recent weeks in the NBA playoffs using these pre-built same game parlays.
See, listen, this is Eric. This is another thing we should look at. Maybe it's just people are clicking the wrong one,
or maybe
it's not necessarily.
I guess we should both be tailing Dustin's SGPs, huh?
Listen, DustinTout.com is coming out like pretty soon, like in August, I think, like right before the NFL season. DustinTouts.com. You can get in for just the cheap price of $1,999.95 for the season, and he'll give you his same game parlay picks. Dustin, this is something that came out this morning over at ESPN. Our friend David Purdom did put out an article about the sports leagues. It's almost as if somebody had been listening to this podcast or something like that over the last year or so when it comes down to it. But the sports leagues have come together and started to – and listen, this is a good thing, in my opinion, because we always said it's way better to get out in front of something than it is to try and play catch up. And at least they are going to address early on here so any concerns there might be with the advertising for sportsbooks.
Yeah, and I think Sam has one up at Legal Sports Report now too about this. But Coalition for Responsible Sports Betting Advertising, basically started by a bunch of the major leagues, all the usual suspects plus a few, and NFL, NBA, NHL. Major League Baseball, WNBA, NASCAR, MLS, and NBC and Fox have come together to put together what they believe is going to be some standards for responsible advertising, during league games and on the television stations that do this. And this will hopefully become a proxy for what happens in the larger market. Like this group does not say the sports books themselves are a part of this, but they're obviously going to be part and parcel with this. If the media outlets and the league say this is how you're going to do it, I think that's how they're all going to do it, right? So it's and this comes at the exact right time, and it's like people were very skeptical that anything like this was going to happen. I was, and we were as well. But this is a great step in terms of messaging, where we see people just coming down on the volume and content of advertising, especially on TV. That's the one that gets the eyeballs and what people complain about. And now we're seeing somebody taking a step and saying, "Hey, we're going to take a look at this. We're going to probably limit it. We're going to curate how it appears," because it has been a free-for-all, right? It has been whatever goes and whatever the sports books want to pay, and the leagues say, "Hey, we take the money from a partnership," and the teams do that. We're finally seeing something that has a chance to succeed in terms of reversing the messaging. So I'm really pleased to see this before it got too late, because we say this all the time on this podcast that like we needed something like this, and it's great to see that this is something here. It has the blessing of the National Council on Problem Gambling as well. So really good stuff, and hopefully this makes a difference in the messaging and the volume and tone and content of sports betting advertising in the U.S.